History laid the foundation
that informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
From the church to the streets, and even in the suites, and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom.
Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Fannie Lou's Classroom right here on your favorite YouTube channel, right here 12 o'clock noon Central Time every Thursday. And remember, we want you to let everybody know that we are here and to like us on our Instagram page, on our Facebook page, and to subscribe and like our YouTube channel so you can be alerted and they can be alerted when we go live for Fannie Lou's Classroom. And as always, we want to give a major shout out to our all-female production team. We got Brooke in the house handling business on today. And of course, we keep our team. We have Candace right here. She's not on camera today, but she's sitting next to me today. Then we have Cheryl, who's still jamming from the opening theme song. And then, of course, Shanika is always in the cut, laid back, all cool, calm, and collected. So we're excited to have us here again for another episode. So we have a great program today, and we're excited to kind of jump right in. But as we always do, we want to start off first by taking just a moment to step into Fannie's class for just a few minutes.
In Fannie Lou's classroom. Now don't you dare be late.
We need retention, not detention.
So one of the things I want to share on today with the hopes that you would go and Google, not only just Google, but go out and look for more information about a particular woman who really, when I was in my early 20s, me and my best friend, we both read the autobiographies of Angela Davis and Assata Shakur. And we were like immediately captured by their courage and conviction to challenge really this would-be democracy, as well as confront the white terror and the white privilege that oftentimes led to economic oppression that impacted Black people and people of color, not just in the U.S., but also around the world. And so immediately after we read those autobiographies, we would lightheartedly call each other Angela and Assata. So when people would see us, they would jokingly call us one of the two names. And of course, you know, it was our way of just how we understood and began to understand how we deal with oppression in America, as well as understanding the intersections of race, class, and gender in America. So it was really my introduction to really being able to understand my place in the world. As a small introduction, of course, we talk later about how that later began to grow. But just, I think it's so important to think about Assata Shakur's, really her life and legacy in terms of what she laid on the line as a Black revolutionary and as a Black freedom fighter. And I think it's so important to learn more about her, to read more about her. And this is her autobiography. This is the book. If you're able to find this, you should pick this up and just read it. I think it's a really good read of her. And just a series of events led her to be put on the FBI's most wanted list. And she was wanted dead or alive. And then some other series of events. I won't tell you what those are because I really like for you to research that. Another series of events led her really to be in prison, and she escaped from prison to later emerge in Cuba, where she was given political asylum and where she remains to this day. And you probably most recently saw Donald Trump, right, was trying to get her to be brought back to America. He was unsuccessful in that, and you probably begin to see people really saying hands off of Assata, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's so important to remember those who really put their lives on the line for the sake of freedom, justice, peace, love, and liberation here in America. So I just want to put that out there and for you to think about that in ways that you may be able to engage and learn more about others whose names may not be as known as other names in the world. But I think it's important that we really spread out and look at the women in particular, the Black women in particular, who did that work. And so this really leads us into our conversation on today with an amazing guest. You are in for a treat. She is a scholar, a genius. She is so many things. I could just name 1,000 things that she is, but most importantly, she is very important to me by way of being a mentor and really has become like a second mother to me. And so we want to first acknowledge the fact that this is the first Thursday in the month of August, and this is also known as Black August, which is the month where we we acknowledge and commemorate the countless organizers, activists, freedom fighters who sacrificed their freedom and lives for the struggle of Black liberation. And so we want to at least acknowledge that we know that this is Black August month, and I want to expand that conversation and really have, and many of those are political prisoners even still to this day. And so we want to expand that conversation and talk to our very special guest on today by the name of Dr. Iva E. Carruthers. And I'm going to read a very brief bio, but please go to the link on the channel and read her full bio, because just read it. That's all I'm going to say. Just read it and you'll see what we have in our midst on today that we don't want to take for granted. We want to hear all that she has to say to us on today, which I hope will be a very robust and vibrant conversation that will hopefully lead us all to understand that we all have a part to play in this constant struggle for justice and equity here in America and beyond. So the Reverend Dr. Iva E. Carruthers is a founding trustee, and she is the general secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, an interdenominational organization within the African American faith tradition focused on social justice issues. She has a long history of engagement in community development initiatives and social justice ministry, fostering interfaith and racial reparatory justice dialogue in the United States, the Caribbean, South America, Asia, and Africa. In partnership with the McCormick Theological Seminary, she is designing the National Center for Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation. Dr. Carruthers has also authored and edited a number of articles and publications in areas of religion, sociology, digital technology, and was appointed to the White House Advisory Council. Dr. Carruthers also developed an educational software that was awarded a Computer World Smithsonian Award. And with all of that, she holds degrees from the University of Illinois, Northwestern University, Garrett Theological Seminary, and Meadville Lombard Theological School, and is the recipient of many awards and several postdoctoral fellowships. Fannie Lou's Classroom, let's welcome the one and only Dr. Iva Elaine Carruthers. Welcome to Fannie Lou's Classroom, Dr. C.
Thank you, Reverend D.
So
I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, I'm so glad that you are with us on today. So one of the things we wanted to talk about as the team got together and talked about what we wanted to really kick off the month of August with, we thought about, hey, it's Black August. How about we really have someone who can really talk to us about this protracted struggle that we have, really seeking justice and liberation. And let's talk about the people who have really been a part of this struggle. And I said, well, I know someone who can take us way back and who can really talk about it from living it, and also really being able to talk to us about, what's a way forward? How can we, move forward? So we'll just kind of throw some questions out there, but feel free, because you're Dr. Iva Carruthers, feel free to really, just talk to us and what we might need to know and what we might need to think about doing. So maybe perhaps we can start with, if you want to just talk to us and tell us about, from your vantage point, just the history of freedom fighters and organizers and activists in the U.S. context over, I guess, this protracted struggle. What has that movement, how have you seen it maybe emerge? And I don't know if it has had a cycle where it has gone down. Is it back on the rise? If you could just give us kind of like maybe a history lesson here, I think that'd be great.
Okay, well, I think what I want to do first is to lift up some of the unsung heroes that I stand in legacy with, and one of them that comes to mind right at this moment is Callie House. Mm-hmm. And Mother Callie was and is considered to be the mothers of the reparations movement. And the center that you mentioned that I've been asked to design at McCormick Theological Seminary is a center in which we are establishing a lecture series in her name, because she understood many years ago in the 1800s that Black people were due reparations, number one, and that Black people have always resisted, and that it is a people's movement. It is not just about those whose names we know, mm-hmm. or leaders who we elevate or who get elevated, that we need to understand, to appreciate. And I say that because I think part of our challenge is for us to always interrogate the ways in which our history is presented and presented to us, and sometimes presented to us by us. And that we need to consider how we need to reframe it to get us on the right pathway of understanding and analysis. And with that, I would say that for me, I'm absolutely convinced that first moments of resistance occurred when that, what I call the snatch occurred, which is when the European slave catchers snatched our people from the continent of Africa and put us on those ships, where we essentially reinvented family, what it meant to be family, across the differences of our language, our gender, our experiences, our culture, our ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera. We reinvented family sufficiently enough to create movements of resistance. And it is in those moments, and it is with that view in mind, that I think we ought to understand, to your point, that this moment in August 2022 is really an affirmation and a commemoration of all of those who resisted, who were liberation fighters and warriors, who were the Maroons, who were those who taught our children how to speak in doublespeak, how to navigate systems that were designed to oppress them. And therefore, it is our capacity to resist and to reinvent ourselves and to resurrect ourselves generation after generation that really represents the liberative movements. And there are those in particular who did it so well that they were picked out of, they were targeted, they were decapitated physically and emotionally and in terms of imprisonment, because they were so bad in our language as those who were liberationists and those who fought for the liberation of our people, including Sister Asada.
Yeah, and so one of the things you just said, and I would like for you to maybe, because I don't want to assume that everybody knows, because one of the things you have always taught me, right, was how we have to be very cautious about, in our current context, if we hear somebody's doing like this struggle, they're doing this justice movement, as thinking that they are the first, right? It's not understanding that we're always building on, right, what has happened before. It may be a reinvention, but we didn't start it, right? So
Correct.
Can you, can you talk to us about when you say Maroons, what is when you say that, can you maybe give us a definition of what a Maroon is and why it's important to understand that history?
Sure. So the Maroon communities were communities of Black families, men, women, and children, who escaped, often in the forest, in the mountains, etc., to live as free people and to offer the resistance that would help those who were enslaved understand and be reminded that freedom is not free, and that they would dare to continue to fight on the behalf of the people for our freedom. Many of those Maroon communities that we know about throughout South America and the Caribbean are represented by the logo of our organization, the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, and that image is of a Black man who has broken the chains of slavery and who is blowing a conch shell, for symboling, let us call together our people, let us call the community together, let us call a sacred assembly, because our movement is a movement of the divine, a movement of God. And then as we gather with the sword, and in our case, as an organization, that sword represents the word. And so the maroon or maroonage represents our communities that were reinvented and grounded in purposeful living for liberation of the people.
And so, and building on that, right, so we think about, I often say, Black August is not another Black History Month, right? I think it's, in and of itself, is what it is what we're remembering, commemorating. To me, it also, at least for me, it also has a sense of a call to action too, right? I think it's also, this is who's gone before us. This is the work they have done. Now, what are we doing to carry that work a little further? And so, what would you say, what would be a call to action you would want to issue to people, and particularly, Black people, in light of all that we continue to be up against and what it seemingly, we seem to be, as some have said, sitting ducks, right? Whether we're going to the grocery store, whether we're sleeping in our beds, like just regular everyday occurrences can really be deadly for us. Like, that's a reality. So what would you want to say to us in regards to what actually we might want to take in light of commemorating, remembering those Black liberation freedom fighters?
I think quite succinctly, it is to remember to tell the story to the children. One of my greatest concerns and efforts is to always try and figure out, how do we make sure our children know our story? You are in Texas, which is a bedrock of energy and effort to deny our story, to lie about our story, to distort our story, to even block us from teaching our story, as they have created this myth around critical race theory and suggesting that to even teach Martin Luther King is heresy. To teach Toni Morrison or Maya Angelou is heresy. We have to understand that with each generation, if our children lose their memory of what the Maroon community represented and how they connect to that Maroon community, then the people have won over us without ever having to do anything else, because in the words of one of my colleagues, Bobby Wright, we become victims of menticide. So that we, in a way, begin to take on, in the words of Carter G. Woodson, the backdoor mentality, where when there is no backdoor, we create it. And so what we know are two things, that in terms of socialization, if you don't control the education of your children, you will lose your children, because they will not have a sense of identity or purposeful living or vision for how they fit into the future. And it's not just the future in Dallas, it's the future on a world stage. The world belongs to our children, but our children don't know that. The other thing that I think we have to understand is that the research is now clear that this field, it's called epigenetics, is a field which suggests, the studies have suggested, that trauma is passed genetically. Trauma can be passed through the DNA. What that means, therefore, is that when you think about the trauma that our children are living and have lived through, and our foreparents have lived and are living through in terms of what is now in our genetic as the next generation, then we know that a lot of the consequences of white domination and those systems of oppression are impacting our life chances in terms of our health, in terms of our social, emotional well-being, etc. We must attend to the unspoken words of our children trying to process what they see on TV around George Floyd. We must attend to our children's unspoken pain around what they have experienced trying to adapt and accommodate a transitional period of COVID. We got to talk about that with them. We have to create environments where they feel free to express themselves, and we help them process that trauma and that pain and that lack of understanding. And we must connect that for them to understand that that is all the more reason for them to strive, to do well, to be well, to take care of themselves, and to, at all costs, hold tight to visions and dreams, because they can defy the systems of oppression that they wake up to every day.
Yeah, wow. So much that was so rich. And I think So what I'm also hearing you saying that is this idea, this notion around Black resistance is not something we need to run away from, but we need to really, in my opinion, double down on, right? We have to continue to resist the ways in which systems and institutions continue to try to dehumanize and to really, in my opinion, continue to devalue, right, our humanity in the process.
Right.
And so,
And we have to understand this is sacred work. That's the other part of that. This is not just political work. It is not sociological work.
Yes, ma'am.
This is deeply theological and sacred work. And God is calling us to that. We have to make sure we understand that the God that they prayed to January 6th in the halls of the Senate is not the God that we pray to. The God that they prayed to on the top of the ship is not the God that was offered prayers and petitions of those of our foreparents who were at the bottom of the ship. Those are different gods.
yes, ma'am. You're getting amens all around the room, okay? And so with that being the case, I'm glad you said that, because for me it's also, and yes, we, so let me just say it this way, and we know there's nuances. We know Black church is not the same everywhere, but I do want to shift and talk about then, in light of what you just said, as it's being sacred work, that it's being holy work, right? What's the role then of the Black church? And, you know, I'm talking about the Black church that stands in the prophetic tradition, but also the church with Black people in them that either have left that memory or who have no idea about, you know, the prophetic Black church that was born out of resistance, to use the language of L.H. Welchel, right? I'm just wondering if you could talk to us. I want to talk now to those of us who may or may not see this as sacred work, right? And what is our role, to your point about really making sure that we tend to the children? Because I heard that very clear from you too, right? That we have to really equip our children to be able to grow up in a way where they know this is not the way it has to be. They have the power, whether that be solidarity power, whether that be political and supernatural power, right, to resist this. So talk to us a little bit about what you would say, what the church needs to do in this moment.
Well, I think the church needs to self-examine and assess itself, and to do a real, true look in the mirror and identify our strengths, our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, and the things that we have abandoned that we need to reclaim in order to create healthy, just, purposeful communities that serve the collective. I know that you and your work in ministry have been very attentive to creating a concept called the just church. And the just church model is a model in which, yes, you go into brick and mortar buildings to worship, but you come out of those brick and mortar buildings to serve. And one of the tests of that service is when you walk out of the door, we need to look around and say, well, you know, how is our community doing? If our community is not doing too well, then that's a statement and a testimony and a call to us to do the sacred work that we must do regardless of what other people do. If we are sitting waiting for other people to do what we must do for ourselves, then we are losing the power of resistance and the power of collective impact that can transform and change a world. And so it is my position that the Black church has to reclaim its sacred space as a space that becomes an epicenter by which our communities live with one another in the spirit of Ubuntu, which means I am because you are. It means the remembrances of the woman who put her hand in her bosom and gave us $1 for us to go to college, built institutions and built hospitals and schools and gave us opportunities for the next generation to do better. You know, in Africa, in East Africa, you know, we get up and we say, how you doing, etc. In East Africa, among the Maasai people, the way they greet each other in the morning is they ask the question, how are the children? Because the children's well-being is a barometer of a community's well-being. And so if we could just begin to think simplistically about what it means to create communities of healthy, happy children who are clear about where their legacy lies and resides and how their legacy is calling them into carrying forth the next generation of resistance. I think that's what August ought to speak for and to.
Yeah, and so even in building on that, because I think obviously I think you're right on target, of course, with your response. But I'll be honest, in terms of the work that we do, even here, at Friendship West, the work I do beyond the church, and even with my colleagues who are sitting here in this space with me, sometimes, and me and you have had this conversation too. I look around and I just wonder, do we have that sense of urgency, right, in light of everything that what we see with our own eyes in our communities and what we see on the TV? And I'm just wondering, how do we...
No, because we are victims of menticide. We have allowed other people to define our truth. And we, as they say, don't believe your lying eyes, because it is just amazing what a lie that was spewed out of the mouth of a former president of the United States has now come to become a major movement of divide for this nation that is teetering on a civil war. That is because the lies become the truth, and the truth becomes the mythology. And so what we have to do is to take responsibility to keep the truth before the people. And that does not happen through osmosis. It does not happen just because we want it to happen. We have to be intentional about making it happen. And not to do that is to create communities of ignorance and communities of apathy and communities of complacency in which we lose the will to resist. And with each generation, we get weaker and weaker.
And that is what that really scares me, if I'm honest, right?
Sure.
And because I know it doesn't have to be that way, and I just don't know what we do to... So I put it this way. So we try to do that. So what you're speaking to, right, how we continue to stand tall, right, tell the truth in love and be truth tellers, and how, as you know, the people who do that are the ones who, one, probably either do not get I would say the exposure, I guess, if that you want to put it that way. You tend to get, because we know media drives like what they want us to see and consume so much of, and how we buy into that. So when somebody comes along, then, right, it's almost like that scene in Malcolm X when Elijah Muhammad showed him the water with the glass with the dark water in it, then the clear glass, right? And I'm just wondering, where do we even start? So I know I know the Proctor Conference, for example, does an amazing job at really trying to do exactly what you're saying we should be doing. But I'm just wondering, is there hope for people who have become victims of menticide? Like, how do we even begin to reclaim people's minds? It's almost
Well,
as if
I think we have to keep hope alive. But I also think that we have to start where we are in our living rooms. And we have to start understanding the power of the technology. And I used to, as you know, I do a lot of work in technology and worked on the internet before the internet, and developed software. And one of the things that we used to say is, you cannot allow the technology to use you. You must learn how to use the technology. Our children are using the technology in ways that are using them, instead of them using the technology by becoming producers of the content that is transformative for us to understand. There's nothing more powerful than images, which undergird what I call ideation. Images tell a story. Lerone Bennett said, images feels, image sees, image touches, image begins to touch your entire mind, body, spirit in ways that create ideas. And what is happening is our children are seeing the images attached to words which reinforce the fact that they are less than, that others are better than, that they are not worthy of, and that the only thing they can do is mimic others in terms of looks, in terms of behaviors, in terms of aspirations, as opposed to us pulling ourselves together where we are and beginning to talk about and share how we must control and create and be co-creators in our divine destiny in order to create the images and ideas that will set not just us free, but really free the world.
Yeah, so
And so we cannot default to thinking that somebody else is going to free us,
yes.
nor can we default to thinking that it has to be a celebrity that frees us, whether we see that celebrity as the preacher on Sunday morning or that celebrity that just released a new a new video.
Yes, ma'am. So, because I'm gonna tell you, some days I ask myself, I think about when Jesus approached a man at the pool, and when he was telling him why he hadn't gotten in the pool, and Jesus simply asked the question,
Right.
"Do you want to be made well?" And sometimes I do ask myself the question of, sometimes just the communities that we work in, do you really want to be made well? Right, just in terms of what we choose to digest and what we choose to give our time and attention to, when presented, right, in my opinion, with an alternative that really can be your liberation, right, where it really can free you. And so that's always, I'm always wrestling with that, honestly, in a lot of cases. And some of the folks in the room do the work with me, and they sense that frustration, that tension as well, even in the church.
And I agree, ditto, ditto, ditto. I wrestle with it as well. And I think what we, come back to, which is why we get up in the morning and start all over again,
Right.
is that we know it's not so much they don't want to be well, they've given up on a hope to be well.
And understandably so in this country, right?
Yes.
And so we think about, Black August. We think about, we're talking about the legacy of freedom fighters, activists, et cetera, who have really tried to dismantle some of these systems and institutions that really do cause harm and not healing. It speaks to, I want you to be able to talk about the work that you're doing around reparations, right? Because I think when we look at history, we see that this is a very legitimate and viable not just conversation that we ought to have, but something needs to be done. But I think a lot of people still think it's all about a check when we say reparations. So can you please talk to us about, when we talk about the reparations movement, what are we saying?
Well, what I'm saying is, first of all, there's not enough money in the world for you all to pay me for what you did to my four parents. And therefore, reparations cannot be reduced to money.
Yes.
Reparations includes money, but reparations is a process to repair the harm done. And repairing the harm done means finding ways to create spaces that are healing, that are whole, that are empowering. And to do that in a capitalistic world, of course, it requires money, and there has to be a transference of money. But there also has to be moments of time for recollection, for remembrance, and for lamentation. Do we understand how many millions of bodies are at the bottom of the ocean as a result of the transatlantic slave trade? Do we understand that right now we've got churches discovering mass graves in their cemeteries of enslaved Black people? Do we understand that when we wake up and we have our children name themselves a minority when people of African descent are a majority in the world, that is a statement of self-negation, that is fake news? That is harm that has been done. When we believe that beauty is a standard of straight hair down to your behind, and we're going to pay other people to get access to that hair, and that hair is going to not only be paid for by us, but if an entrepreneur wants to become a distributor of that
Right.
hair, they can't even do that.
Right.
What does that say about us in terms of how we see ourselves and how we see the need for us to create systems of economic prosperity that depends on us trusting and loving ourselves?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, I mean, we're all just like, yes, just amen and ashe, right? So I also, because I think you also have another unique perspective, so I want to broaden this beyond the U. If you can begin to connect the global dots for us, like why? Because oftentimes, and some of the folks in the room can attest to this. Sometimes we talk about doing something to help. Other folks in the diaspora. It's like, why are we doing that? We have, Black folks who need help here in America. So I really want you to talk to us about why, and it's important for us to see ourselves. And you kind of alluded to that when you talk about that we are the majority, right, in the world. So I want you, can you just connect those global dots for us, for people to understand why there's not something evil or something that we should not be doing to think about other people in the African diaspora to help them where help is needed.
There's an African proverb that says, together the ants ate the elephant. And so the call to the power of unified action is a call that speaks to how you define your best interest in connection to other people who share your story and share having vested interest in the same thing, that you organize yourselves together in order to defeat the enemy, in order to defeat that which is dominating over you. And so we must understand that the experiences that we have are similarly experienced by people of African descent the world over, which is why, as a United Nations non-governmental organization, the Proctor Conference gets to engage with people of African descent around the world who are fighting the same battle of reparations, of their land being stolen, of their natural resources being stolen, of their labor being stolen, of their children being told that they're inferior, of them being told that their religion or their beliefs were inferior, and until the white people discovered them, they were not human, and they are not fully human. And we can go on and on. So what I'm suggesting is that our interest lies with people who share a story that then allows us to organize, because the stronger we are in unity, the mightier we become to defeat those powers and principalities and systems which are designed to do us harm.
Yeah, I just think that's so important. I know for me, at least, I can't remember the year, but we were in London, and you may remember this. We actually went out with a transatlantic roundtable on religion and race for one of those conferences, and we went out to, I believe it was East London, and we sat around in chairs, and we began to hear people talk about, what they were up against. And I tell people often, if I were to close my eyes, if it wasn't for the accent, you would think you were, in South Dallas. Just hearing about, no access to housing, lack of access and affordability of health care. I mean, the hyper incarceration rates, all of that, right, was the exact, to your point, the exact same thing that we hear even right here in Dallas, in Texas, and in the U.S. And so, and I just think, why would we be upset about assisting, people that look just like us with food and emergency needs, right? It just baffles me how sometimes we just kind of draw that line at this imaginary or certainly man-made border, right? And because for me,
yes, and it's a divide and conquer strategy that we've bought into that speaks to our own self-demise, because only those who are in control and in power benefit from us separating ourselves from people who share our experience. So we may be one paycheck away from being unemployed, but we think because we got a job and we one check away that we're better than those who are unemployed.
Which is, and what people found out, particularly during COVID, right? When the global
Yeah.
pandemic hit, they realized how close they were, right? And unfortunately, some experienced that. So I just thank you for sharing that portion, that part, because I just think that is something major for me, that if we can really begin to see that we are stronger together and we see our struggles as the same, though, you know, we may not be in the same country. I just think that's important for us to understand and to know that. So thank you for sharing that. So the one thing I want to do now, well, I guess we can wrap this portion of the interview up. And I want to, because I really want to shift into more of the parlor conversation to just kind of learn more about who you are, what you do. And, you know, because I always tell people we're more than our professions, more than our vocations. We're well-rounded individuals. And in your case, you're a whole lot. And I just want people to be able to hear more about who you are, because I think you've done a great job of just really giving us a lot to think about. I think a lot to think about. You've given a lot of history, a lot of information for us to do additional research, for people to begin to engage and be a part of a liberation for all of us, and particularly in our Black community. So Dr. Carruthers, so I know you, so I won't say certain things, but tell us about something about you that people probably don't know or be surprised to know about you.
Well, my hardest task ever in the world, despite all those degrees and going to school and taking tests and so forth, was raising 2 boys who are now young men. And that was the greatest challenge and, of course, the reward of my life. People don't know that I love butterflies, and you might see me with you on a boat going down a river, looking at a blue butterfly, chasing it in the boat. People do not know probably that I'm pretty impetuous, that if you call me and say, let's go to Guadalupe, and I can figure out how to go, I'm gone, right?
Yes.
People don't know that I think if I could do it all over again and had another career I could commit to with the kind of passion that I have for the work that I do in the ministry that I'm called to do, it would be teaching young children between the ages of 3 and 6. And being able to look in their little eyes and see the innocence and the opportunity to give them a vision of a world that they can create. And that brings me much joy. So there are lots of things. I like to read books. I like to be adventuresome, and I've been up in a hot air balloon, and I've been inducted into the Hot Air Balloon Society. What else would you like to know, Danielle? You know more about me.
Oh, I do.
Many people.
I do. I do. Because I think you just have
that my son calls me Sam Frenetta because he says that I'm a collector. And so when you walk into my home or my spaces, you will see what looks like a lot of memorabilia. People say it's a museum.
Yes, it is.
And sometimes my son just reduces it to, Mommy, you going to get some more junk? I mean, how much more stuff you going to get? But anyway, so, and the bag lady, and so, you know, they do things like give me a gift. You're going to miss your bus, bag lady, you're going to miss your bus.
You do have a lot of memorabilia. We'll definitely put it that way. And you will have several bags. Because I talk about your bags. Like, where are we going with all these bags? What's in these bags? You never know what you got to pull out. So, and I also, you know, and I think that's one thing I think that people definitely just love about you, those that know you, is that I know you have sat in parliaments around this world. You have dined at the table with kings and queens, and you just never have lost your common touch. And I think that's what makes you such a beautiful soul, a beautiful person in the world, and why you're so loved by so many people. And that's why we cut people if they even try to step to you. But we know, can I tell them about the train ride?
Oh, yeah. You can do that.
No, you tell them about the train ride. So let me tell you.
No, you tell them.
So we were on a train from Liverpool back to London. And so the train was running late. The conductor's like, hey, whether you have a first class ticket or just get on the train, we're late, just grab a seat. We're not worried about what you pay for your ticket. So we grabbed seats. So I'm just, we're talking. And a white lady walks up and she looks at her ticket. She looks at me. And I'm thinking, he said, you don't have a seat. Before I could say anything, Dr. Carruthers said, look, lady, sit down. He said, get on this train. He's not worried about what your ticket said. Go sit down. So ain't nobody getting up from these seats. I was like, well, I was going to ride with her. So I was so many stories of, so PhD'd up and degreed up, but trust. She's about it, right? And you just never know. It will pop out before you can say anything. Before you can respond, she's already on it. And so I just think that's what makes you, I'm crazy about you. I love you to death, because really how I met Dr. C, after Dr. Haynes, we talked about, how the story, how I became the Minister of Justice here. And I said, well, I really need a mentor, a woman who does this work. Because, it's just different being a woman in ministry. So he said, oh, yeah, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Carruthers. I'm like, okay, that's great. So it took a while, and she happened to come to the church with, I think it was Dr. Wright and the late Dr. Asa Hilliard. And they did like a series, I think over a weekend. So back then, on Keith's, some of y'all knew, y'all don't know about that. I was on Keith's upstairs. It's a little office that Pastor had, and they were eating. And at the time, it was Pastor's assistant. She said, Dr. Carruthers is upstairs. Do you want to meet her? I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to bother her. So I was way younger then, right, Dr. C? I was so young. You done had me for a long time. So we knocked on the door, and she was eating. And I was like, oh, she's eating. And so, Dr. Haynes said, Dr. Carruthers, this is Danielle. This is who Pastor wanted you to meet. And she stopped eating. She got up from and she came over, and she grabbed my hand, and she just looked at me and smiled and gave me a hug. And I asked her if she would be my mentor, and she said yes. And I guess that's like 17, 18 years later. Here we are. Yeah. And so I'm just always so appreciative of the way that you really just immediately took me in. So as you say, we went from mentor, mentee to mother, daughter to colleague, right? And it has just been a beautiful journey. And she's drugged me all around the world too. So I appreciate it. So a lot of what people hear about me and see what I do and how I think and how I understand what it means for me to be a Black woman, to be Black and Christian in the world, it is because of Dr. Iva Carruthers. And so she is she's just a gem, right? I think she is what I would call an unsung hero, right? Just in terms of who she is. And we can't even get to all her various careers, because you heard her say before the internet, she had her own technology company where she produced educational software. And didn't you used to work for Quincy Jones?
I was a consultant to his project in South Africa around the internet and creating, So it's a whole lot. Every time I talk to her, I hear something new, and I've been talking to her for like 17 or 18 years. And so just a remarkable woman. I just wanted to make sure I had you on, because you are a jewel and a gem to our people. And so that just can't be unnoticed and underestimated at all. As if you heard her, that's just a snippet of how she rolls. So she is certainly a scholar within her own right, an activist in her own right. But above all, as I said again, she's just a beautiful person. And I so appreciate her and all that she just does for me. But everybody calls her Mama Iva, okay? I see some people call you Mama Iva, and I'm thinking, aren't y'all the same age? Right, exactly. Ain't you older than her?
Well, in some cases, yes. But I think that speaks to the wisdom, right, that you have and how you present yourself and what you care. Because listen, I have seen very notable people. I see how when she walks in rooms, the deference that people give, the way she's received. And she walks around, you wouldn't even know it, because how tall you does see? About 4 feet tall.
Oh, no, come on, I'm 5'2".
But you just see her, and she got a stride on her, too. She walks, and she has all her bags. You just wouldn't think she's who she is, and I think that's why people love her so much, and we will all go to bat for her at any time, anywhere. So thank you, Dr. C, for being on Fannie Lou's Classroom. Everybody appreciates what you had to offer us, and we hope to have you back again. So we're super. So you definitely have to come back.
I thank you for continuing to do the work. And I am so proud of you, and I am honored to have been one of your guests for the Fannie Lou Hamer Classroom.
Yes, ma'am. We're going to get the whole name. Amen. We're going to get the whole, yes, ma'am, the whole name. But, trademark purposes, we don't use her last name. But yes, ma'am, Fannie Lou Hamer, we wanted to make sure we certainly gave homage to one who I think represents the best of what it means to be a freedom fighter, an organizer, or activist, and a woman who stands 10 toes down and stood in the face of white supremacy and never backed down. So that's what we wanted to create here. We wanted to bring people on like you who could add to and build on that legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer. So thank you, Dr. Carruthers, for being in Fannie Lou's classroom today. You had so much invaluable information to share with us, and we look forward to having you back because we know it's so much more you can share with us and to elevate our thinking and to push us into doing. And so listen, every Thursday, 12 o'clock Central Time, right here at Fannie Lou's classroom, and make sure you like our YouTube channel, subscribe so you know we're going live. Tell everybody about it. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Instagram, as well as our Facebook page. You can find us there, Fannie Lou's Classroom. We look forward to seeing you everywhere on our social media platforms, but definitely back here, 12 o'clock noon in Fannie Lou's Classroom.
From the church house.